Thank you, Chancellor May, and hello, everyone. It's good to see you. Very good to see you. And I want to say thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you to the GSA and for having this event. And I want to first start with a land acknowledgement and having a moment to acknowledge the land on which we're gathered. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of the Patwin people. And today there are 3 federally recognized Patwin tribes: Catchell-Dehe Band of Wintoon Indians, of the Calusa Indian Community, Quetzal-Dehe Wintoon Nation, and Yocha-Dehe Wintoon Nation. The Patwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected as elders have instructed the young through generations, and we're honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands. So I want to talk for a few minutes about owning your own journey and how each step in the journey can lead to a series of destinations. Whichever destination you choose is yours to own, and own it when you get there. My own journey has been full of twists and turns, and I often think about this in terms of permutations and combinations. Different pathways have led to this moment, and I want to talk a little bit about how I sort of got to where I am at this time. So I was in engineering, intro to engineering, different kinds of programs when I was young, 7th and 8th grade. I had coloring books that were math problems and all of those kinds of things, really interesting things. Grew up in New Jersey. I took electrical engineering courses at Howard University, where I actually struggled in electronics, by the way, in the theory, but not so much in the lab. I was much better in the lab. Eventually, went on to get a master's degree and did master's research in engineering at Northwestern, and had a postdoc at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, had my own lab after getting a PhD in speech science with a focus on speech recognition systems. And interestingly enough, Chancellor May mentioned that. Became a professor, later went into administration with being an assistant dean, an associate vice provost, and a vice chancellor. But throughout my journey, I wasn't sure where I was going to be or where my experiences were going to take me. But I've been inspired, particularly by other women in engineering throughout. Let me share some stories about a few of them. Dr. Janet Rutledge was the first Black woman to receive a PhD in electrical engineering from Georgia Tech. And she was my master's thesis advisor in what we had as EECS, which was Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at Northwestern University. She was also on my PhD committee. And I applied to Northwestern for graduate school in the first place because she was a professor there. I had been an undergraduate student in Washington, D.C. at Howard University, and I saw her on the stage and heard about her reputation as being one of the legendary women of the National Society of Black Engineers. She had been a NSBE leader and gone on to be a professor. And so to me, as a teenager, sitting in an audience at a conference and seeing, interesting enough, people like Chancellor May way back then, and also people like Dr. Janet Rutledge, Dr. Valerie Taylor, were some others, I said, oh, okay, maybe this graduate thing can be something that I can aspire to after all. And so I decided that I wanted to be where she was. And I did something that I would not really prescribe to any student who wants to go to grad school. I only applied to Northwestern. I applied to that school because she was there, and that's where I wanted to be. I even changed my research focus. I had done an undergraduate thesis in image processing, and because she was doing speech processing, I said, well, I'm going to go there and I'm going to do speech. So interestingly enough, her work was based on microprocessor-based hearing aids. She was doing noise reduction, and she ran a speech and audio processing lab. And I then became a speech processing student in her lab. Now, years later, I was a professor at Wisconsin. I had worked for a startup. And I ended up back again working for Dr. Rutledge because she was then at a different university. She was conducting a national search for a director of a program. I applied, and she became my boss once again. At that time, she was associate dean. She later became dean and vice provost of the graduate school at UMBC in Maryland. So you never know where you're going to end up. And speaking about mentoring, I actually brought a prop with me. This book, it's old, it's kind of tattered now. It says on it on my own terms. This book was given to me by another mentor, another woman in engineering, Dr. Christine Grant, professor of chemical and biomolecular engineering. She was the 2022 president of the American Institute of Chemical Engineers, or AICHE, and she gave me this book 10 years ago in 2013, and she wrote a note to me in the beginning. And on the note, and as part of something that she had pre-written, she said, "Move from passive observation to active participation in determining your destiny." And I did just that. This book is full of my goals and dreams. It discusses my desires for sharing work in humanitarian engineering on a global scale, connection to the Sustainable Development Goals. And I don't know if you've seen this before, this chart of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations, where they have things like gender equity, clean water and sanitation, affordable clean energy, sustainable cities and communities, challenges that many of the countries in the world are taking to heart and trying to find science and engineering solutions to help to solve them. One of my goals was to be at the UN. I wrote about it in this book, and later had an opportunity to speak at the United Nations headquarters twice. I've been out to every continent to discuss engineering for all, except one. I have not been to Antarctica yet. But I've given speeches in English and Spanish, and at the invitation of yet another mentor, another woman in engineering, Dr. Maria Larando Petri, who is the executive director of the Latin and Caribbean Consortium of Engineering Institutions and also professor of electrical and computer engineering at Florida Atlantic University, I've now been able to speak at universities across Latin America, later India, London, Taiwan, Africa, and it's been an extraordinary journey. And then there's Dr. Julia Ross, Julie. And I mention all these women because they all have different cultural backgrounds. They're not all monolithic or all from one group. Julie is the Dean of Engineering at Virginia Tech. And she took time to talk with me over coffee several times when I was thinking about taking this job here at UC Davis. And she said something that I still hold sacred to this day. I'm not going to necessarily share it, but basically she let me know that I have a place wherever I decide to be. And here I am now, the inaugural Vice Chancellor for DEI, committed to Chancellor May's strategic plan to boldly go. You probably know he's a Trekkie. And to our own 5 goals of the Diversity and Inclusion Strategic Vision: to identify, attract, retain, successfully graduate a diverse student body, the same thing for our faculty and staff; to promote campus climate conducive to inclusive excellence; to commit to diversity and inclusion training and instruction, work with neighboring communities, and to have accountability for those goals. And further, I really appreciate our own UC Davis College of Engineering's commitment to creating a sustainable world through socially responsible engineering with next-level research on energy, climate, mobility, and health, with an engineering for all approach that will not leave any community behind. And so to the women especially, universities may not have been designed for us when they were developed in the 9th century. And women students didn't come to UC Davis until 1914. But the campus now has more than 18,000 women students, and you have the opportunity to determine your path. And wherever you are, at whichever point it is in your journey, it's important and it counts. I didn't know that some of my very early work was going to be part of discussions at IBM Watson Research Labs and at IEEE conferences in work that we now look at and know as Alexa and Siri. I had no idea. And similarly, you don't know where your ideas will lead, what solutions you will design, who you may inspire or mentor, and how your experiences will have impact. But each step that you take will lead somewhere, and you can make it count for something. So go ahead, be bold, inch forward, and take that next step. And good luck on your journey. Thank you very much.